There's a number in your head. You didn't write it down, and you've probably never said it out loud to another person, but it's there all the same, fixed in the back of your mind like a quiet promise you made to yourself somewhere along the way. It's not just a number, it's a finish line, and you've decided that once you cross it, the weight will lift, the worry will ease, and something inside you will finally settle into the peace you've been chasing longer than you care to admit. You've dressed this number up in all kinds of language. You call it security, you call it freedom, you call it success. But what you're really describing is relief, and you've convinced yourself that a certain amount of money is what delivers it. The trouble starts the moment you get close to the number, because that's when the number moves. It has always moved. It will always move. When you had nothing, you thought a few $1,000s would change everything. When you reached it, the bar quietly relocated itself further down the road without announcement or apology. Then it was 10,000. Then a salary figure you once thought was reserved for other kinds of people. Each time you arrived, you looked around at where you'd gotten to, and within a short while, you were pointing at a new horizon. The finish line has a way of staying just far enough ahead to keep you running, and never far enough away to let you stop and wonder if you're running in the right direction. Most people live their entire financial lives inside this cycle and never step outside of it long enough to recognize it for what it is. They accept the premise completely, that more money will eventually do what the last amount didn't. And they pour their years into the pursuit with a sincerity that would be admirable if it weren't so costly. They sacrifice rest, relationships, and presence, all in exchange for the next number, which will also move. The cycle isn't a flaw in the system, it is the system. And the system was never designed to deliver what you're actually looking for through it. You're not running toward a destination. You're running away from a feeling, and money cannot cure a feeling. It can only temporarily drown one out. What people are truly chasing when they say they want more money is almost never the money itself. Strip away the surface, and you find a hunger for something that no financial institution has ever been able to manufacture or deposit. People want peace. They want confidence. Not the performed kind, but the quiet internal kind of a person who trusts themselves completely. They want dignity, the private, unshakable sense of standing on solid ground, of being capable, of having built something real. These are legitimate desires, among the most human things a person can want. But they are not waiting at the end of a deposit. They are not stored inside a portfolio or a property deed. They are internal conditions that can only be created internally. And every year you spend trying to purchase them with income is a year you spend not doing the only work that can actually produce them. The reason the number keeps moving is not that you haven't been ambitious enough or disciplined enough. The reason it keeps moving is that you're using the number to answer a question it was never designed to answer. You're pointing at a financial target and asking it to tell you whether you are worthy, whether you are safe, whether you've done enough. And the number cannot answer that question. It was never built with that capacity. So every time you reach it and find the question still unanswered, your mind recalibrates the target upward, assuming the problem was the size of the number rather than the nature of the question. You'll run to the next number, and it will happen again. It will keep happening until you stop asking the number to do the work that only you can do. When a person's income rises significantly, there's almost always a period where they believe something fundamental has changed. And in some practical ways, it has. The options are broader. The daily pressures that once dominated every decision have loosened their grip. There's room to breathe where there was none before, and that room is real. But what doesn't change, what almost no one prepares for, is the person who arrived there. The beliefs they held about money before the income grew are still present, operating with the same authority they always had, making the same kinds of decisions, just with larger numbers attached. You don't become a different person when your bank account grows. You become a more funded version of the person you already were, and that person came with everything packed. Think about the person who grew up in a home where money was perpetually uncertain, where the end of the month carried a particular kind of dread, where conversations about money were either absent or sharp-edged. That person learned something very early, in the way children learn the most important things, not from a lesson, but from atmosphere, from repetition, from watching how the adults around them related to money and drawing permanent conclusions. What they learned was that money is not safe to hold. It doesn't stay. It disappears without warning. And the only reasonable response to having some is to spend it before circumstances take it anyway. This wasn't a philosophy they chose. It was a survival adaptation, completely appropriate for the environment in which it was formed. The problem is that survival adaptations formed in childhood don't automatically decommission themselves when the environment changes. They travel with the person. They run in the background of every financial decision, as present and powerful at 50,000 a month as they were at 500, producing the same result. Money in, money out, nothing accumulated, nothing secured. There's another version of this that shows up in people who grew up being taught, directly or indirectly, that wealth is something to be suspicious of, that people with significant money are different in ways that aren't admirable, that wanting more than enough is a character flaw. These messages are more common than people acknowledge, and they don't disappear simply because a person intellectually rejects them in adulthood. They persist at a deeper level, and they make themselves known when money begins to arrive in real amounts. A quiet discomfort settles in, a sense of incongruence between who the money suggests you are and who you've always understood yourself to be. And without tools to examine that discomfort directly, the mind resolves it the only way it knows how. It begins to rout the money away, not through a single dramatic decision, but through a steady accumulation of small ones, unnecessary purchases, carelessly chosen investments, compulsive generosity, undercharging, overgiving, quietly undermining financial progress until the balance reflects something closer to what felt familiar and therefore safe. The shame version is different, and it may be the most expensive of all. This is the person who spent years on the wrong side of the financial divide, who felt the sting of not being able to afford what everyone else had, who experienced the particular humiliation of being looked at a certain way. When money arrives for this person, it carries a mission that was never assigned out loud. Erase the evidence. Every purchase is a rebuttal. Every upgrade is an argument. The car, the clothes, the address, they're all dispatches from a person who needs the world to update its records about who they are now. This spending feels like progress because in a narrow sense it is. But it's expensive progress aimed at the past rather than the future. And it tends to consume far more than the person realizes until the math becomes unavoidable. You cannot spend your way out of a story you're telling yourself. You can only rewrite it. And that requires a different kind of work than the kind that shows up on a receipt. What all these patterns share is that they're invisible to the person living them. They don't feel like patterns rooted in childhood programming or unresolved shame. They feel like reasonable decisions made in the present tense by a clear-headed adult, simply responding to circumstances. That's what makes them so durable and so costly. The work of identifying them isn't comfortable, and it isn't quick, and it doesn't come with external validation. But it's the only work that changes the result. Every dollar you earn lands on the foundation of what you believe about yourself and what you believe about money. If that foundation was built crooked, the building will lean, regardless of how much you add to it. More money will not fix it. It will simply fund it. There is a way of understanding money's relationship to human character that very few people are told plainly. Money does not transform who you are. It does not repair what is broken, fill what is empty, or quiet what is loud. What money does, and it does this with remarkable consistency, is amplify. It takes whatever is already present inside a person and turns up the volume on it. The generous person becomes remarkably generous. The disciplined person builds things of lasting value. But the fearful person finds larger fears to inhabit. The reckless person locates more spectacular ways to be reckless. The insecure person discovers that insecurity can be expressed at extraordinary expense. The volume goes up. The song stays exactly the same. This is why the person who loses sleep over a $400 car repair does not find rest when they have $400,000 in the bank. It seems like they should, like the math would settle the anxiety. But financial anxiety is almost never actually about money. It's about identity. It's about a belief so deep, it's become indistinguishable from fact. More money does not revise that belief. It doesn't reach down into the place where the belief lives and replace it with something steadier. What it does is give the belief a bigger stage. Now the stakes are higher. The amounts that could be lost are larger. The same anxiety that kept a person up worrying about a few $100s will keep them up worrying about several $100,000. The worry was never proportional to the balance. It was proportional to the belief. Think carefully about the person who has long struggled with the sense that they're not quite as valuable as others believe them to be, who has performed confidence while privately questioning whether the performance is convincing. When income was modest, the insecurity expressed itself in modest ways: a hesitation to speak up, a tendency to underestimate their own worth in negotiations. When their income grows significantly, the insecurity doesn't leave. It simply acquires a larger operating budget. Now it expresses itself through the things they buy to announce their arrival. Markers of success that say to anyone paying attention that they belong here, that the success is real. The spending isn't pleasure-seeking. It's argument-making. And it's an argument that can never be fully won because it's being made to an internal judge who will not be satisfied by external evidence. The loneliness version of this is perhaps the most quietly devastating. There are people for whom genuine connection has always been difficult, who have been warm enough on the surface while remaining unreachable at depth, who mistook familiarity for closeness. When money was scarce, this loneliness was relatively contained. The social world was smaller. The gap between what appeared to be a full life and what was actually being experienced wasn't so wide. When the money arrives and the world expands, more people appear. The invitations multiply. The social orbit fills with people who offer warmth that feels like friendship. And yet the person at the center remains unreached. The wall that kept people at a distance before the money is still there. Now its consequences are more visible. You can have a room full of people and still be entirely alone in it. When the room is larger and fuller than it's ever been, and the aloneness is just as absolute, the realization that the problem was never about access or resources can be overwhelming. The principle extends in every direction, without exception. Money is a magnifying instrument. It makes more of what is already there. This is not a judgment on money or on the people who seek it. It's simply a description of what money actually does when it meets a human being. And it's information that's almost universally withheld from conversations about financial success. The conversations focus on the earning, on strategy and hustle and leverage. And they skip entirely the question of what kind of person is doing the earning and what that person is carrying into the money. But that question is the one that determines everything. Not what you earn, not what you invest, not what you build, who you are when you get there. That's what decides whether what you've built means anything at all. Section 4, the work nobody posts about. Now, I want to talk about a type of work that almost never gets discussed in conversations about financial success. And the silence around it isn't accidental. It's invisible by nature. It produces nothing that can be photographed or measured or shown to anyone. And in a world that has decided visibility is the primary marker of value, invisible work tends to get classified as no work at all. But the invisible work is the work that determines whether everything else you do means anything. It's the work of examining what you actually believe about yourself, not the polished version you present to the world, not the affirmations you've read, but the deep and wordless conviction running underneath all of that. Making decisions before your conscious mind gets a chance to weigh in. Until you've done that examination honestly, every financial strategy you apply is being executed by someone who doesn't fully understand their own motivations. That's a significant handicap, regardless of how talented or disciplined you are. Self-worth is the hidden variable in every financial equation, and it operates with extraordinary precision. Most people who've encountered this idea have encountered it in ways that were too abstract to act on. A sentence in a book, a concept mentioned in passing, a phrase that felt true for a moment and then dissolved before it could change anything. The gap between knowing something as an idea and knowing it as a lived reality that reshapes your choices is enormous. Crossing it requires sitting with some uncomfortable questions. Not once, not briefly, not in the abstract, but seriously and at length. Questions like, what do I actually believe I'm allowed to have? What ceiling have I quietly installed above my own ambitions? When money has arrived in the past, what did I do with it? And if I'm honest, what belief was driving those choices? These aren't questions with flattering answers for most people, but they're the questions that, when answered honestly, begin to reveal the architecture of the results you've been producing. The relationship a person has with the concept of enough is one of the least examined and most consequential aspects of their financial life. Most people have never genuinely asked themselves what enough is, not as a number, not as an aspiration, but as a true and felt definition. What would it actually feel like to have enough? Would they recognize it? Would they allow themselves to feel it? Or would the mind immediately recalibrate upward the way it always has, using a new target to avoid the discomfort of sitting with what's already been built? The inability to arrive, to actually inhabit what's been achieved rather than immediately treating it as a platform for the next thing, is one of the most common and least discussed forms of suffering among people who are by any external measure doing well. They've built significant things and they can't feel them. They stand in the middle of what they said they wanted and experience it primarily as a reminder of how far there still is to go. The problem isn't ambition. The problem is the absence of a genuine relationship with enough, which turns ambition into a treadmill. The internal inventory most people avoid isn't, in its essence, complicated. What it requires is a willingness to look at your own patterns without the usual layers of excuse, to sit with what your financial history actually says about what you believe, rather than what your financial goals say about what you hope. Your financial history is an honest document. It reflects choices made by someone under the influence of specific beliefs. If you read it the way you'd read a candid biography rather than a piece of promotional material, it will tell you things about yourself that are more accurate than anything you'd come up with by intention. The patterns in it, the recurring ways money tends to arrive and depart, the income ceilings that keep reasserting themselves, are not bad luck. They are not the results of an indifferent universe. They are the results of a consistent internal logic that is operating exactly as designed. And until you identify it, it will keep producing the same outcomes with larger numbers attached. Doing this work is the hardest thing most people will never do. It's harder than learning a new skill, harder than building a business, harder than executing a financial strategy with discipline over years. It's harder because it offers no external reward in the short term, because the findings aren't always flattering, and because the culture doesn't recognize or celebrate it. You won't be congratulated for examining your relationship with money and finding that it was built on fear. There's no metric for the progress. There's no milestone to show to the world. But the person who does this work, who makes it as regular and non-negotiable as any other discipline they practice, becomes something that all the strategy in the world cannot manufacture. Someone whose earning and their inner life are finally pointed in the same direction. Someone for whom financial growth is an expression of genuine development rather than an attempt to substitute for it. And here's the key. You have to become a person who is not at war with their own money. A person who earns without sabotaging, who builds without tearing down, who receives without guilt and gives without depletion. A person who can look at what they have and feel something genuine, rather than performing gratitude they don't actually feel, or running calculations on how far short it still falls. This version of financial life is available to far more people than currently experience it. But it requires beginning in a place that almost all conventional financial advice skips entirely. It requires beginning with the person. Building the person first doesn't mean delaying the earning. It doesn't mean waiting until some internal ideal has been achieved before taking action. The two happen simultaneously, and they inform each other. The challenges of earning and building surface internal material that would otherwise stay hidden. And the internal work done in parallel changes the quality of the decisions being made. What building the person first means, practically, is making the inner work a genuine priority rather than a luxury to be attended to once the real work is done. It means accepting that the real work includes this, that there is no version of durable financial success built on a person who hasn't looked honestly at what they believe and made deliberate choices about what they'll continue to carry. The person who does this doesn't wait until they're healed to begin. They begin and they do the healing as they go. And over time, the external building and the internal development reinforce each other in a way that produces results neither would produce alone. The distinction between money as a scoreboard and money as a tool sounds simple when stated plainly, and is one of the most difficult things in practice to actually live. Most people's relationship with money is a scoreboard relationship, whether they acknowledge it or not. The balance rises and they feel better about themselves. The balance falls and something in them registers it as a verdict rather than a fluctuation. Every number becomes a data point in an ongoing argument about whether they are enough. And since that argument was never going to be settled by a number, it never is. Living inside this relationship is exhausting in ways that are hard to articulate. Because the exhaustion is so constant, it begins to feel like simply the nature of having financial responsibility, rather than a symptom of a specific and correctable problem. When money becomes a tool, genuinely a tool, used for specific purposes and returned to the shelf when the job is done, the exhaustion lifts. Decisions about money become cleaner. A bad month is a bad month. A good year is a good year. Neither one is a referendum on the person managing through it. Anchoring wealth to values rather than validation requires knowing what your values actually are, which is something far fewer people know with real clarity than would claim otherwise. Values are not the words you write down during a planning session. They're the things that, when you act in alignment with them, produce a sense of integrity and right order. And when you act against them, produce a friction that no amount of money or approval can smooth over. They're discovered through living, and through the honest examination of living, through asking which of your choices you'd stand behind completely, and which ones in the quiet after leave you unsatisfied in ways you'd prefer not to examine too closely. A person who knows their values in this genuine sense has an anchor that holds regardless of what the financial weather does. Their sense of who they are is not stored in the number. It's stored somewhere the number cannot reach, and that's the only place it can be kept safely. Becoming the person who can hold wealth, who can receive it without destroying it and use it without being diminished by it, is the work that makes everything else make sense. It's not the final step in the financial journey. It's the first one. It's the thing that determines whether the journey goes anywhere worth going or simply covers a great deal of ground in an exhausting circle. More money will not fix what is unfixed in you. It will not answer the questions you haven't answered, resolve the conflicts you haven't resolved, or deliver the peace you haven't built. What it will do, faithfully and without exception, is fund whatever version of yourself shows up to receive it. So the question worth sitting with, the one that renders every strategy secondary until it's answered, is not how you're going to earn more. The question is, who is going to be there when it arrives? And if the answer is the same person who has always been there, running the same programs and carrying the same beliefs with larger numbers attached, then more money will do what it has always done. It will fund it, loudly, and at greater cost than ever before.